The blizzard had come without warning, turning the Montana Territory sky into a wall of white death, and Tucker Xander nearly rode past the half-buried figure in the snowbank before his horse reared in protest. He pulled hard on the reins, his breath frosting in the frigid December air of 1879, squinting through the driving snow at what had startled his mare. At first he thought it was just another drift, but then he saw the dark fabric, the slender hand reaching upward as if grasping for salvation itself. Tucker threw himself from the saddle, his boots sinking deep into the powder as he stumbled toward the form. She was nearly covered, her lips blue, her eyes barely open. He dropped to his knees and began digging frantically with his gloved hands, throwing snow aside in great armfuls. A woman. Young, maybe 20 or so, dressed in traveling clothes completely inadequate for this weather. Her face was pale as marble, her dark hair plastered to her cheeks with melting ice. "Can you hear me?" Tucker shouted over the howling wind. "Madam, can you hear me?" Her eyelids fluttered. Her lips moved, but no sound came out at first. He leaned closer, his ear nearly touching her frozen mouth. "I was coming to you," she whispered, the words barely audible but unmistakable. Tucker's heart stopped. He stared down at her face, at those half-closed eyes that seemed to be looking right through him into his soul. "What did you say?" "Coming to you," she repeated, and then her eyes closed completely. He did not hesitate. Tucker scooped her from the snowbank, shocked at how light she was, how cold her body felt even through his thick coat. He carried her to his horse, which stamped nervously in the deepening drifts. Getting both of them onto the mare took precious minutes he feared they did not have. But finally, he was settled in the saddle with the woman cradled against his chest, his coat wrapped around them both. The ride back to his cabin took an eternity. Tucker lived alone about 3 miles outside Gold Hill, Montana Territory, in a sturdy log structure he had built with his own hands 2 years prior. It was not much, but it was warm and solid, and right now those were the only things that mattered. He urged the mare forward through the storm, one arm locked around the woman's limp form, the other gripping the reins. Her words echoed in his mind with every labored step the horse took through the deep snow. "I was coming to you." How could she have been coming to him? He did not know her, had never seen her face before this moment. Yet something about those words, about the absolute certainty in her fading voice, made him believe her completely. By the time his cabin came into view through the white curtain of snow, Tucker could barely feel his own face. He half fell from the saddle, keeping his grip on the woman, and kicked open his door. The fire had burned down to embers, but the interior was still blessedly warmer than the deadly cold outside. He laid her on his bed, the only bed, and immediately set about building up the fire. Once flames were crackling and beginning to push back the chill, Tucker turned his attention to the woman. Her lips were still blue, her breathing shallow and rapid. He had seen frostbite before, had lost a friend to exposure one brutal winter, and he knew he had to warm her slowly and carefully. First he removed her soaked outer garments with clinical efficiency, trying not to think about the impropriety of undressing an unconscious woman he had never met. Her dress beneath was damp, but not soaked through. He wrapped her in every blanket he owned, tucking them tight around her shivering form. Then he heated water on the fire and used clean cloths to gently warm her hands and feet, watching anxiously for any sign of the blackening that would indicate tissue death. Her fingers and toes were frighteningly pale, but as he worked, color began to return in painful, slow increments. He prepared warm broth from the beef bones he had been saving, and when it was ready, he carefully spooned tiny amounts between her lips, massaging her throat to encourage swallowing. Night fell early, as it did in Montana winters, and still the blizzard raged outside. Tucker tended the fire constantly, checking on the woman every few minutes. Around midnight, her eyes finally opened. She looked around in confusion, then focused on Tucker where he sat in a chair he had pulled close to the bedside. "Where am I?" "My cabin, 3 miles west of Gold Hill." His voice was rough from disuse and worry. "I found you in a snowbank. You were nearly frozen to death." She closed her eyes, and for a moment he thought she had lost consciousness again, but then she spoke. "I remember. I was so cold. I thought I was going to die. You would have if I had not come along when I did." Tucker leaned forward. "What were you doing out there? Where were you going in this storm?" Her eyes opened again, meeting his directly. They were brown, he noticed, a warm brown like maple syrup, and despite her ordeal there was something fierce and determined in them. "I was coming to you. I told you that." "You did," Tucker acknowledged, his pulse quickening. "But I do not understand. I have never met you before. How could you have been coming to me?" She tried to sit up, grimaced, and fell back against the pillows. "My name is Beatrice Vaughn, and I have traveled 800 miles to find you." Tucker Xander, hearing his name from her lips, sent a shock through him like a lightning strike. "How do you know who I am?" "Because you wrote to my sister." Beatrice's voice was weak but steady, her eyes never leaving his face. "Sarah Vaughn. You wrote to her 6 months ago, answering her advertisement in the matrimonial news. You corresponded for weeks, and she was supposed to come here to marry you, but she died." Tucker felt the blood drain from his face. He remembered Sarah Vaughn. He had been writing to her, had been hopeful for the first time in years that he might have a chance at happiness, at a family. Then the letters had simply stopped coming, and he had assumed she had changed her mind, had found someone closer to home, or simply decided a Montana cowboy was not what she wanted after all. "She died." The words came out hoarse. "How? When?" "Cholera. 2 months ago." Beatrice's voice cracked. "She was my twin sister. We did everything together our whole lives, and when she got sick, when I knew she was dying, she made me promise something." Tucker waited, his hands gripping his knees so hard his knuckles showed white. "She made me promise I would come to you in her place. She said you were a good man, the best man she had ever known, even though you had never met in person. She said your letters showed a gentle soul, a kind heart, and that you deserved happiness." Beatrice's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "She said if she could not be your wife, then I should come to you because she wanted you to have the life you had planned together." Tucker stood abruptly, turning away to stare into the fire. His mind reeled. This was madness. A dying woman's wish, a sister's promise, but madness nonetheless. "You do not even know me." Neither did Sarah, not really, but she knew enough. "She showed me all your letters. I read every word you wrote to her." Beatrice's voice grew stronger. "You told her about your life, about growing up in Missouri, about coming west after the war to try to build something of your own. You told her about this cabin you built with your own hands, about your dreams of having a ranch, a family. You told her you were lonely, and you were honest about what you could offer and what you could not." Tucker kept his back to her, staring at the flames. "And based on that, you traveled 800 miles through the worst winter in years to find a stranger." "Based on that, and based on my sister's judgment. Sarah was the wisest person I knew. If she believed you were worth this journey, then I believe her." Beatrice paused. "And I had nothing left to keep me in Ohio. Our parents died 3 years ago. Sarah was all I had. When she died, I was alone in the world. So when I promised her I would come to you, it was not just for her sake. It was for mine too." Tucker finally turned back to face her. She was watching him with those fierce brown eyes, and despite her weakness, despite having nearly died in a snowbank hours earlier, There was no hesitation in her gaze. She meant every word. "That is the most foolish, reckless, brave thing I have ever heard," he said quietly. "I know." She almost smiled. "But I gave her my word, and I do not break my promises, especially not to my sister. So when I tell you I was coming to you, that is the absolute truth. I have been traveling for 3 weeks, and I was so close. Gold Hill was just over the ridge. Then the storm hit, and my horse threw me and ran off, and I thought I would die within sight of my destination. But you found me." Tucker pulled the chair closer to the bed and sat down heavily. "I found you, and now what? You think we can just pick up where Sarah left off? Get married and live happily ever after?" "I do not know what I think about that yet," Beatrice admitted, and he respected her honesty. "Right now I am just grateful to be alive. Beyond that we will have to see, but I kept my promise to my sister. I came to you, Tucker Xander, and here I am." The blizzard continued for 3 more days. During that time, Tucker and Beatrice existed in a strange bubble of forced proximity and unexpected comfort. He gave her the bed while he slept on a pile of blankets near the fire. They talked for hours, about everything and nothing, filling in the gaps that letters could never quite bridge. Beatrice told him about growing up in Cincinnati, about how she and Sarah had been inseparable from birth, identical in appearance but different in temperament. Sarah had been the dreamer, the romantic, while Beatrice was more practical, more grounded. When Sarah had decided to answer a matrimonial advertisement, Beatrice had thought she was crazy, but she had helped her sister compose the perfect responses anyway, because that was what sisters did. "She fell in love with your words," Beatrice said on the second evening, wrapped in blankets by the fire while Tucker prepared their dinner. "Every time a letter came, she would read it to me at least 3 times. She said you wrote the way poets must think, honest and plain but somehow beautiful anyway." Tucker felt heat rise to his face that had nothing to do with the fire. "I just wrote what I was thinking. That is what made it beautiful." Beatrice watched him work, her expression thoughtful. "You told her the truth always, about your life, about what marriage to you would mean. You did not try to make it sound easier than it would be." "Lying would have been pointless," Tucker said, stirring the stew. "If she came all this way and found out I had misrepresented myself, she would have just turned around and left. Better to be honest from the start. Most men are not so practical when it comes to wooing women." "I am not most men," he glanced at her, "and I was not trying to woo anyone. I was trying to find a partner, someone who wanted the same kind of life I did." "And did Sarah want the same kind of life?" Tucker was quiet for a moment, ladling stew into 2 bowls. "Based on her letters, I thought so. She talked about wanting a simple life, away from the crowds and noise of the city. She said she wanted to build something lasting, something real. But I will never really know now, will I?" Beatrice accepted the bowl he handed her, their fingers brushing briefly. "No. But I am here instead, and I want those same things. Maybe even more than Sarah did, if I am being honest. She romanticized the West, thought of it as an adventure. I see it more clearly, I think. I know the work will be hard, the winters long, the loneliness sometimes crushing, but I still want it. I want a life that means something, with someone who values the same things I do." Tucker sat across from her, his own bowl cradled in his hands. "And you think I might be that someone, even though we are strangers?" "We are less strange to each other than most couples on their wedding day," Beatrice pointed out. "I know things about you that most wives do not learn for years. And you knew Sarah, who was half of me. We shared the same face, the same voice. When you wrote to her, in some ways you were writing to me too." It was a strange logic, but Tucker found himself unable to argue with it. He had been drawn to Sarah's letters, to the intelligence and humor that shone through her words. Now, talking to Beatrice, he found those same qualities and more. She had a directness that was refreshing, a lack of artifice that he appreciated. And there was something else too, something he was hesitant to name yet. A pull, a connection that seemed to grow stronger with each conversation. On the third day, Beatrice was strong enough to walk around the cabin, though Tucker insisted she keep wrapped in blankets. She examined his home with open curiosity, running her hands over the sturdy furniture he had made himself, studying the few books on his shelf, looking out the small window at the endless white landscape. "You built all of this yourself?" she asked, turning to face him. "Every log, every board." Tucker was mending a bridle, his hands working automatically. "Took me the better part of a year working alone, but I wanted it to be right, wanted it to be strong enough to last. It is beautiful, simple but solid, honest like your letters." Beatrice moved closer to where he sat. "How much land do you have?" 160 acres. "I claimed it under the Homestead Act, worked it for the required 5 years. It is mine free and clear now." He glanced up at her. "Plenty of room for cattle, for expansion if the herd grows. Water rights to the creek that runs through the south section. Good grazing, protection from the worst winds. It is a fine piece of land. And you work it alone, mostly. I hire day workers when I need them for roundup or branding, but day to day it is just me." He hesitated. "It was going to be me and Sarah, if things had worked out." Beatrice was quiet for a moment. "Do you wish it was her instead of me?" Tucker set down the bridle and looked at her fully. She stood silhouetted against the window, light from the snow-bright day creating a halo around her dark hair. She looked so much like how he had imagined Sarah, but she was not Sarah. She was herself, distinct and real and here. "No," he said honestly. "I wish she had not died, I wish she had not suffered, but I do not wish you were her. Does that make sense?" "Yes." Beatrice's voice was soft. "It does." On the fourth day, the storm finally broke. Tucker woke to silence, the absence of howling wind so profound it felt like a physical presence. He rose and opened the door to a world transformed into crystal and diamonds, the sun dazzling on snow that had drifted as high as the cabin's roof in places. Beatrice came to stand beside him, gasping at the beauty. "I have never seen anything like it." "It is something," Tucker agreed. He looked toward where he had left his horse in the small barn. "I need to check on the mare, make sure she weathered the storm all right." "You should stay inside where it is warm." But Beatrice was already wrapping herself in her now dry coat. "I want to come with you. I need to start learning about this life if I am going to live it." Tucker studied her for a moment, then nodded. "All right, but stay close. The snow is deeper than it looks, and there are drifts that could swallow you whole." They made their way to the barn together, Tucker breaking trail, Beatrice following in his footsteps. The mare was fine, as were the 3 steers Tucker kept for milk and meat. He showed Beatrice how to feed them, how to check their water, explaining the daily routine of caring for animals in winter. "It is more work than I thought," she admitted, though she did not seem daunted, just thoughtful. "Everything takes longer in winter. Water freezes, animals need more food to stay warm, and you are fighting the cold every minute of every day." Tucker forked hay into the feeding trough. "But spring comes eventually, and then you remember why you endure the winter. The land wakes up, the grass comes back green, the cattle grow fat and healthy. It makes it all worthwhile." They returned to the cabin with Beatrice's cheeks red from the cold and her eyes bright with exhilaration. Tucker built up the fire while she prepared coffee, and they fell into an easy routine that felt oddly domestic, oddly right. "I should get you into town," Tucker said as they ate breakfast. "You need proper clothes for this climate, and I am sure there are people wondering if you ever arrived." "Did anyone know you were coming?" Beatrice shook her head. "No, I did not write ahead, I thought it would be better to just arrive, to not give you time to think about it too much and possibly tell me not to come." Tucker almost smiled. That was probably wise. I might have done exactly that. But now that I am here, now that you have saved my life and we have spent these days together, will you still send me away?" She looked at him directly, her brown eyes searching his face. Tucker took a long breath. "I do not know what I will do. This is not what I expected. But I made you a promise when I agreed to correspond with Sarah, even if I made it to her and not to you. I promised I would be honest, that I would be fair, and that I would give marriage a real chance if she came to me. So I will honor that promise now with you if you are willing." "What does that mean exactly?" Beatrice's voice was careful, controlled. "It means we court properly. We spend time together, get to know each other, see if what we have found in these few days can grow into something lasting." He met her gaze steadily. "And if it does, if we both decide this is what we want, then we marry. But only if we both decide." Beatrice was quiet for a long moment, and Tucker could see her weighing his words, considering all the implications. Finally, she nodded. "That is fair. That is more than fair, actually. Most men would have already decided one way or another, but you are giving us both a real choice." "I do not want a wife who feels trapped or obligated," Tucker said. "I want a partner who chooses this life, chooses me with clear eyes and a willing heart. Nothing less will do." "Then we court," Beatrice said, and she smiled for the first time since he had pulled her from that snowbank, a genuine smile that transformed her entire face. "And we see where it leads." The ride into Gold Hill the next day was difficult, the snow still deep and treacherous, but Tucker's mare was strong and sure-footed. Beatrice rode behind him, her arms around his waist, and he was acutely aware of her presence, her warmth against his back, the trust it took for her to hold on to him as they navigated the white landscape. Gold Hill was a small town, maybe 200 souls at most, clustered along the banks of a creek that rang gold with promise in the summer and froze solid in the winter. There was a general store, a saloon, a church, a schoolhouse, and a scattering of other buildings that served the ranchers and miners who made up the local population. Tucker was known here, respected as a hard worker and an honest man, and when he rode in with Beatrice behind him, he could feel the eyes tracking their progress down the main street. He stopped at the general store first, helping Beatrice down from the horse. "We need to get you outfitted properly. You cannot survive a Montana winter in what you were wearing when I found you." Inside, the store was warm and crowded with goods. The proprietor, a middle-aged man named Henry Daniels, looked up from his counter with surprise. Tucker Xander did not expect to see anyone out in this weather. "And who might this be?" "Miss Beatrice Vaughn," Tucker said, removing his hat. "She just arrived from Ohio and she needs proper cold-weather clothing." Henry's eyebrows rose, but he was too polite to ask the obvious questions. "Of course, my wife Martha can help her with that." "Martha." He called toward the back of the store, and a pleasant-looking woman emerged from between shelves. While Martha took Beatrice to look at dresses, coats, boots, and other necessities, Henry leaned across the counter toward Tucker. "Vaughn. That is the name of the woman you were corresponding with, was it not?" Tucker nodded. "Her sister. Sarah died of cholera before she could make the journey, so Beatrice came in her place." Henry let out a low whistle. "That is quite a story. And what are your intentions toward this young lady?" "Honorable ones," Tucker said firmly. "We are courting properly, seeing if we suit. If we do, we will marry. If not, I will help her get settled somewhere else or arrange her passage back to Ohio if that is what she wants." "You are a good man, Tucker," Henry said. "Not many would be so careful about doing right by a woman in her position. She is fortunate you found her when you did." Tucker thought about those words. "I was coming to you, and the absolute faith in them. I think maybe I am the fortunate one. He spent the next hour sitting on a barrel near the stove while Beatrice tried on what seemed like every garment in the store. But when she finally emerged, dressed in sturdy wool with a thick coat and proper boots, Tucker had to admit it was worth the wait. She looked like she belonged here now, like she was a part of this harsh, beautiful land. "Better?" she asked, turning in a circle so he could see. "Much better. You will not freeze to death now, at least." They purchased everything she needed, plus supplies for the cabin, and Tucker charged it all to his account. Henry never blinked at the total, just made neat notations in his ledger and promised to have everything ready to load onto a sled Tucker could pick up in a few days when the roads were clearer. As they were leaving, Martha Daniels pulled Tucker aside. "That girl looks at you like you hung the moon," she said quietly. "I saw it while we were shopping. She talks about you with respect and warmth. Do not let her get away, Tucker. Good women are rare out here, and ones willing to brave a Montana winter for a man they barely know are rarer still." Tucker did not know what to say to that, so he just nodded and followed Beatrice out into the cold. Their next stop was the boarding house run by a widow named Mrs. Paulson. Tucker wanted Beatrice to have a proper place to stay while they courted, but Mrs. Paulson took one look at them and shook her head. "I appreciate the propriety, Mr. Xander, but I do not have a single room available. The storm brought in half a dozen stranded travelers, and they are all still here waiting for the roads to clear. It could be a week or more before I have space." Tucker looked at Beatrice, and she looked back at him, and they both knew what this meant. She would have to stay at his cabin, at least for now. The thought sent a thrill through him that he tried to suppress. "I will keep sleeping by the fire," he said quietly as they walked back toward where he had left the horse. "You can have the bed, and we will keep everything proper. I will not compromise your reputation." "I think my reputation was already compromised the moment I decided to travel 800 miles to marry a man I had never met," Beatrice said dryly. "But I appreciate your consideration, and I trust you, Tucker. I would not have come this far if I did not." They stopped at the church before leaving town, and Tucker introduced Beatrice to Reverend Walsh, a stern but kind man who had been serving the Gold Hill community for a decade. "We wanted you to know the situation," Tucker explained. "Miss Vaughn came here intending to marry me, but we have agreed to court properly first. Given the circumstances, she is staying at my cabin, but I want to assure you that I am behaving with complete honor." Reverend Walsh listened carefully, his sharp eyes moving between them. Finally, he nodded. "I believe you, Mr. Xander. You have always been a man of your word. And Miss Vaughn, welcome to Gold Hill. It is unusual circumstances that bring you here, but then the Lord works in mysterious ways. I will expect to see you both at services on Sunday." "We will be here," Tucker promised. The ride back to the cabin felt different somehow, the air between them charged with new possibilities. They had declared their intentions publicly now, had set themselves on a path that could lead to marriage or heartbreak. There was no going back. That night, after they had eaten and cleaned up, they sat together by the fire. Tucker found himself telling her things he had never told anyone, about his childhood in Missouri, about the war that had stolen his youth, about the hard years after when he had drifted west looking for a place to call home. "I was so angry after the war," he admitted, staring into the flames. "Angry at the world, at God, at myself for surviving when so many good men had not. I did things I am not proud of, worked jobs that dulled my soul. It was not until I came to Montana, claimed this land, and started building this cabin that I felt like I could breathe again. Like maybe I deserved a life after all." Beatrice was quiet beside him, and when he finally looked at her, he saw tears on her cheeks. "Thank you for telling me that," she said. Sarah would have understood. She was always drawn to broken things, always wanted to help heal them. I am more practical, but that does not mean I do not understand pain. Do not respect the courage it takes to keep going when everything inside you wants to quit. You do not think I am broken. The question came out more vulnerable than he had intended. I think you were wounded, and you healed yourself. That is not the same as being broken. She reached out and took his hand, the first time she had initiated physical contact between them. And I think you are one of the strongest people I have ever met. Tucker looked down at their joined hands, at the way her slender fingers fit between his work-roughened ones, and something shifted in his chest. This was not Sarah, would never be Sarah, but maybe that was all right. Maybe Beatrice was exactly who she needed to be, who he needed her to be. The days that followed fell into a rhythm that felt natural despite its strangeness. Tucker taught Beatrice the rhythms of ranch life, how to care for the animals, how to judge the weather by the sky and the wind, how to move through the snow without exhausting herself. She proved to be a quick learner, unafraid of hard work, willing to get her hands dirty. In the evenings they talked, endless conversations that ranged from the profound to the mundane. They discovered shared opinions on politics, religion, the proper way to make bread. They argued good-naturedly about books, laughed over silly things, and slowly, carefully built something between them that felt solid and real. Tucker found himself noticing small things about her. The way she bit her lower lip when she was concentrating. The sound of her laugh, which was surprisingly deep and genuine. The competence of her hands as she learned to milk the cow, to mend his shirts, to prepare meals from limited supplies. She never complained about the primitive conditions, never seemed to regret her decision to come here. If anything, she bloomed in this harsh place, growing more confident and more beautiful with each passing day. For her part, Beatrice watched Tucker with equal attention. She noticed how gentle he was with the animals despite his strength, how he always made sure she was warm and fed before he worried about himself, how he kept his word about maintaining propriety even though they shared a small space. She saw the loneliness in him, the scars the war had left, but also the fundamental goodness that Sarah had recognized in his letters. One evening, about 2 weeks after he had found her in the snowbank, Beatrice asked him about Sarah. Did you love her, or the idea of her? Tucker considered the question carefully. I do not know. I cared about her, looked forward to her letters, imagined a future with her. But was that love? I am not sure I know what love feels like, to be honest. I have never been in love before. Neither have I, Beatrice admitted. I watched friends fall for boys back home, saw them get silly and distracted, and I never understood it. I thought maybe I was too practical to ever feel that way. But lately... Lately what? Tucker prompted when she trailed off. Lately, I find myself thinking about you all the time. Wondering what you are doing when you are in the barn, watching for you to come back, feeling this strange flutter in my chest when you smile at me. She looked embarrassed. It is probably silly. It is not silly. Tucker reached across the space between them and took her hand. Because I feel it too. This pull toward you, this wanting to be near you all the time. Is that love? Maybe not yet, but it could be the beginning of it. Beatrice met his eyes, and in that moment, something shifted irrevocably between them. Without planning it, without thinking, Tucker leaned forward and she met him halfway. Their lips touched softly, tentatively, a first kiss that sent warmth flooding through his entire body. When they pulled apart, Beatrice was smiling, her eyes bright. That felt like the beginning of something. Yes, Tucker agreed, still holding her hand. It did. They were more open with their affection after that, though Tucker was still careful to maintain appropriate boundaries. They held hands while walking through the snow, stole kisses when the moment felt right, sat close together by the fire in the evenings. The physical attraction was there, growing stronger, but Tucker refused to act on it fully until they were married. He had promised to treat her with honor, and he would keep that promise no matter how difficult it became. On Sunday, they rode into Gold Hill for church services. The small building was packed, everyone seeking the comfort of community and faith after the brutal storm. Tucker and Beatrice sat together, and he felt the curious glances of the other townspeople, the whispered conversations, but he did not care. Let them talk. He was a grown man courting a grown woman, and there was nothing shameful in that. After the service, Reverend Walsh invited them to his home for Sunday dinner along with several other families. It was a test of sorts, Tucker realized, a chance for the community to meet Beatrice and judge whether she was suitable. He should have felt nervous, but watching Beatrice charm the Reverend's wife with her intelligence and humor, seeing her play with the children and help serve the meal, he felt only pride. She fit here. She belonged. On the ride home that evening, Beatrice was quiet. When Tucker asked if something was wrong, she shook her head. Nothing is wrong. I was just thinking about how different my life is from what I expected it to be a few months ago. When Sarah died, I thought my life was over too in some ways. We had always planned our futures together, and without her I felt unmoored, lost. But now, here in this wild place so far from everything I have ever known, I feel found. Does that make sense? Perfect sense, Tucker said. I felt the same way when I came here. Like I had been wandering all my life and finally arrived home. So this is home now, Beatrice said softly. Your cabin in the Montana Territory, 3 miles from Gold Hill. Home. If you want it to be, Tucker replied. It can be our home, yours and mine together. But only if that is what you want. Beatrice turned to look at him, her face serious. It is what I want. I have been sure for days now, but I did not want to seem hasty or impulsive. But I am sure, Tucker, I want to marry you. I want to build a life with you here. I want this to be our home. Tucker pulled the horse to a stop in the middle of the snowy trail and turned to face her fully. Are you certain? Because once we make this decision, I will not let you go. I will be your husband for the rest of my life, through good times and bad, and I will expect you to be my wife in every sense of the word. I need you to be completely sure. I am sure, Beatrice said, and there was no hesitation in her voice, only certainty and something that looked very much like love. I was coming to you, Tucker Xander. I told you that when you pulled me from the snow, and it was true then and it is true now. My sister sent me to you, but I am staying for me, because you are exactly who I want to spend my life with. Tucker kissed her then, there in the middle of the frozen trail with the stars emerging overhead and the horse stamping impatiently beneath them. He kissed her with all the loneliness and longing he had carried for years, with all the hope and joy that had been growing in him since the moment he had heard her say those impossible words. And she kissed him back with equal fervor, her cold hands cupping his face, her lips warm against his. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Tucker rested his forehead against hers. We will be married as soon as it can be arranged. I will not wait any longer than necessary. Neither will I, Beatrice whispered. Neither will I. They were married 2 weeks later in the Gold Hill Church, with most of the town in attendance. Tucker had asked Henry Daniels to stand up with him, and Beatrice had asked Martha Daniels to stand with her. It was a simple ceremony, but it was perfect. Beatrice wore a dress Martha had helped her make, simple blue wool with white lace at the collar and cuffs. Tucker wore his best suit, the one he had not worn since the war, and he felt both nervous and exhilarated as he stood at the altar waiting for his bride to walk down the aisle. When Beatrice appeared in the doorway, Tucker's breath caught. She was beautiful, but more than that, she was his. His wife, his partner, his future. She walked toward him with confidence and grace, her eyes never leaving his face, and when she reached him and took his hands, Tucker felt something inside him that had been frozen for years finally thaw completely. Reverend Walsh led them through the vows, and Tucker spoke his with absolute sincerity. I, Tucker Xander, take you, Beatrice Vaughn, to be my lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, until death do us part. Beatrice's voice was steady and sure as she repeated the same words back to him, and when Reverend Walsh pronounced them husband and wife, Tucker kissed her with all the pent-up passion he had been holding back for weeks. The congregation cheered, and Martha Daniels wiped tears from her eyes, and Tucker felt like the luckiest man in the Montana Territory. There was a small celebration at the Daniels house after the ceremony, with food and music and dancing. Tucker was not much of a dancer, but he held Beatrice close and moved with her to the fiddle music, and he did not care who saw the way he looked at his new wife. As evening fell and they prepared to return to their cabin, now truly theirs together, Henry Daniels pulled Tucker aside one last time. "You did good, my friend. That woman loves you, anyone can see it, and you love her too. Sarah Vaughn sent you a gift when she sent her sister in her place." Tucker looked over at Beatrice where she was laughing with Martha, her face flushed and happy. "The greatest gift I have ever received," he agreed. The ride home was cold, but Tucker barely felt it. Too aware of Beatrice pressed against him, his wife now in every sense that mattered. When they reached the cabin and he helped her down from the horse, she looked up at the structure with new eyes. "Our home," she said. "Truly ours now." "Truly ours," Tucker agreed. He swept her up into his arms, making her laugh, and carried her across the threshold. Inside, the fire he had built before leaving for the ceremony had kept the space warm. He set Beatrice down gently, and for a moment they just stood there looking at each other, husband and wife, the full weight of what they had done settling over them. "Are you nervous?" Tucker asked quietly. "A little," Beatrice admitted. "But excited too. I want this, Tucker, I want you." He pulled her close, kissing her gently, then with increasing passion. "I want you too. I have wanted you for weeks, but I wanted to do this right, wanted to honor you." "You have," Beatrice whispered against his lips. "And now we are married, and you do not have to hold back any more." That night they became husband and wife in truth, and Tucker found that all his fears about not knowing how to love, not being capable of it, were unfounded. He loved Beatrice with his body and his heart, and she loved him back with equal intensity. They fit together perfectly, as if they had been made for each other, and when they finally fell asleep in each other's arms as the fire burned low, Tucker felt a peace he had never known before. The winter continued, but Tucker barely noticed the cold or the dark. He was too happy, too consumed with his new wife and the life they were building together. Beatrice proved to be everything he had hoped for and more. She was capable and hardworking, unafraid of the difficult life they led. She learned to cook on the temperamental wood stove, to preserve food, to help with the animals. But she was also tender and loving, always ready with a smile or a kiss, making even the hardest days bearable. In February, the worst of the winter hit. Temperatures plunged so low that the water froze solid in its bucket within minutes of bringing it inside. Snow piled higher than the cabin's windows. Tucker and Beatrice were trapped inside for nearly a week, but instead of feeling like a hardship, it felt like a gift. They spent the days talking and reading aloud to each other, the nights making love and dreaming about their future. "I want children," Beatrice said one evening, lying in Tucker's arms. "At least 3 or 4. "That sounds perfect," Tucker replied, running his fingers through her hair. A house full of little ones running around, causing chaos. What if they are girls? Can you handle a house full of daughters? Tucker laughed. I think I could handle anything as long as you are by my side. As winter slowly gave way to spring, they talked more seriously about their plans. Tucker wanted to expand his herd, maybe buy some breeding stock. Beatrice wanted to start a proper vegetable garden, to plant fruit trees that would take years to mature but would eventually provide for their children. In March, Beatrice realized she was pregnant. She told Tucker one evening after dinner, her face glowing with happiness and nerves. I think I am carrying our child. Tucker felt like his heart might burst from his chest. Are you certain? As certain as I can be without a doctor, but yes, I think so. The signs are all there. He pulled her into his arms, holding her so tight she laughed and protested. A baby, our baby. When? Late October, I think, or early November. Tucker did the math in his head. Conceived shortly after their wedding then, their honeymoon baby. I love you, he said, the words spilling out before he could think about them. I love you so much, Beatrice. She pulled back to look at him, tears streaming down her face. I love you too. I have for weeks, but I did not want to say it first. I did not want you to feel obligated. I could never feel obligated about loving you. It is the easiest, most natural thing I have ever done. He kissed her gently. You came to me out of the snow, and you saved my life just as surely as I saved yours that day. Spring arrived in full force in April, the snow melting in great rushing streams, the brown grass slowly turning green. Tucker worked from dawn until dark, repairing winter damage, checking on his cattle, preparing for the busy season ahead. Beatrice worked alongside him as much as her condition would allow, and when he insisted she rest, she took care of the countless domestic tasks that kept their household running. In May, a letter arrived from Ohio. It was from a cousin of Beatrice's, someone Tucker had never heard of before. The letter was brief and businesslike, informing Beatrice that Sarah's few possessions had been packed and shipped to her in Montana, and would she please acknowledge receipt. Beatrice was quiet after reading it, and Tucker found her sitting outside that evening watching the sunset with a distant look in her eyes. He sat beside her, taking her hand. Missing your sister, always, Beatrice said softly, but today especially. I wish he could have seen this, could have known that her crazy dying wish worked out exactly as she hoped. I am happy here, Tucker. So happy it almost scares me sometimes, but Sarah should have been happy too. She deserved to find love and build a life. Maybe she did in a way, Tucker said. She found it through you. She knew you well enough to know you would follow through on your promise, well enough to know that if she could not have the life she wanted, at least you could. That is a kind of love too, putting someone else's happiness before your own. You are right, Beatrice said, leaning against him. And I am going to honor her by living the best life I can, by being the best wife and mother I can be. She sent me to you, but what we have built, that is ours. That is real. The realest thing I have ever known, Tucker agreed. The summer was busy and prosperous. Tucker's herd produced healthy calves, and he sold several at good prices in late summer. With the money, he hired help to build an addition onto the cabin, 2 more rooms that would give them space for the coming baby and future children. Beatrice planted her garden and it flourished under her care, providing them with fresh vegetables throughout the summer. They became more integrated into the Gold Hill community. Tucker served on the church council, and Beatrice joined the Ladies' Aid Society. They made friends, became part of the fabric of the town's life. Everyone knew their story now, how Beatrice had come to marry Tucker in her dead sister's place, how Tucker had found her half frozen in a snowbank. It should have been a source of gossip, but instead it became a kind of romantic legend, a story people told newcomers about the power of faith and love. In August, a traveling photographer came through Gold Hill, and Tucker paid him to take a portrait of him and Beatrice. They dressed in their Sunday best and sat very still while the man worked his complicated equipment. When the photograph was ready a week later, Tucker studied it intently. There they were, frozen in time, a handsome couple with their whole lives ahead of them. Beatrice's hand rested on Tucker's shoulder, and even in the still, formal image, the love between them was palpable. "We should send one to your cousin in Ohio," Tucker suggested. "Let them know you are well and happy." Beatrice agreed, and they mailed the photograph along with a long letter describing their life in Montana. Weeks later, a response came, warm and congratulatory, saying that Sarah would have been so pleased to know everything had worked out. As Beatrice's pregnancy advanced, Tucker became almost comically protective. He would not let her lift anything heavy, insisted she rest frequently, and worried constantly about her health. Beatrice bore his fussing with good humor, knowing it came from love. "I am not made of glass," she told him one September evening when he had insisted on carrying a basket of laundry that she was perfectly capable of carrying herself. "No, but you are carrying the most precious cargo in the world," Tucker replied. "Our child. So you will have to indulge me." "You are ridiculous," Beatrice said, but she was smiling. "But I love you anyway." In late October, on a crisp autumn day with leaves turning gold on the aspens, Beatrice went into labor. Tucker rode like the devil into Gold Hill to fetch Martha Daniels, who served as the town's midwife, then rode back even faster. By the time they returned to the cabin, Beatrice was in hard labor, gripping the bed frame and breathing through the pain. Tucker wanted to stay with her, but Martha shooed him out. "This is women's work. Go chop wood or something. We will call you when it is over." The next several hours were the longest of Tucker's life. He wore a path in the snow outside the cabin, pacing and praying and jumping at every sound. When he finally heard the thin, reedy cry of a newborn baby, he nearly broke down the door in his haste to get inside. Martha met him with a huge smile. "You have a son. A big, healthy, loud son, and your wife did wonderfully. Go meet your boy." Tucker stumbled to the bed where Beatrice lay, exhausted but glowing, a small bundle cradled in her arms. "A boy," she said, looking up at him with tears in her eyes. "We have a son, Tucker." He sat carefully on the edge of the bed, looking down at the tiny face peeking out from the blankets. His son, his child. The baby had a fuzz of dark hair and his mother's nose and Tucker's square chin. He was perfect. "What should we name him?" Tucker asked, unable to take his eyes off the baby. "I was thinking about Thomas," Beatrice said, "after your father. And maybe Samuel for a middle name after mine. Thomas Samuel Xander." "Thomas Samuel Xander," Tucker repeated. "It is perfect. He is perfect. You are perfect." He kissed Beatrice's forehead, then the baby's. "Thank you. Thank you for coming to me, for saving me, for giving me this life." "We saved each other," Beatrice said softly. "Now we just have to raise this little one right. Thomas was a good baby, healthy and growing quickly." Tucker took to fatherhood like he had been born for it, walking the floor with his son in the middle of the night, changing diapers without complaint, talking to the baby constantly even though Thomas could not possibly understand. Beatrice watched her husband with their son and fell in love with him all over again. This was the man she had traveled 800 miles to find, the man her sister had recognized as worth the risk. And Sarah had been right. Tucker was kind and patient, hardworking and honest, gentle and strong. He was everything Beatrice had ever wanted, even though she had not known what that was until she found him. The winter after Thomas was born was milder than the previous one, for which they were both grateful. Caring for an infant in brutal cold would have been nearly impossible, but the weather cooperated, and they settled into their new life as a family of 3. In the spring, Tucker planted a tree in the yard, a young aspen he had dug from the creek bank. "For Thomas," he explained to Beatrice, "so he can watch it grow as he grows." Beatrice smiled, her heart full. "And for any other children we might have. You want more already?" Tucker looked shocked. "Not immediately," Beatrice laughed. "But yes, eventually. I want Thomas to have siblings the way I had Sarah. I want our house to be full of love and life." "Then that is what we will have," Tucker promised. Over the next few years, their family grew. A daughter they named Sarah after Beatrice's twin arrived in 1882, with Beatrice's brown eyes and Tucker's quiet strength. Then another son, James, in 1884, who was loud and energetic from the moment he was born. Each child was treasured, each one adding to the richness of their life. Tucker's ranch prospered. He expanded his herd, bought more land, built a proper barn and several outbuildings. He hired men to help with the work, becoming one of the more successful ranchers in the Gold Hill area. But no matter how busy he became, he always made time for his family, always came home each evening to have dinner with his wife and children, to hear about their days, to tuck them into bed. Beatrice thrived in her role as wife and mother. She was respected in the community, known for her intelligence and her kindness. She taught Sunday school at the church, organized charity drives for families in need, and turned their cabin into a real home, warm and welcoming to everyone who entered. On quiet evenings, after the children were asleep, Tucker and Beatrice would sit together by the fire as they had in those early days, talking about everything and nothing. Sometimes they talked about the future, about what they hoped for their children. Sometimes they reminisced about the past, about how they had found each other. "You ever think about that day I found you in the Snowbank?" Tucker asked one evening in the winter of 1885. They had been married 6 years now, and he loved her more with each passing day. "Sometimes," Beatrice admitted. "I think about how cold I was, how sure I was that I was going to die, and then suddenly there you were, like an answer to a prayer I had not even had time to pray. You told me you were coming to me," Tucker said, "and even though it made no sense, I believed you." "Why do you think that was?" Beatrice was quiet for a moment, considering. "I think because we were supposed to find each other. Maybe Sarah dying was not just a tragedy. Maybe it was the universe's way of making sure I ended up here with you. Maybe you and I were always meant to be together, and Sarah was just the path that led us to each other." "I like that thought," Tucker said, "that we were always meant to be together." "We were," Beatrice said with certainty, "and we will be for the rest of our lives. I came to you through the snow and the cold and the fear, and you were there waiting for me. You will always be there waiting for me, and I will always come to you. That is what love is, Tucker. Knowing someone will be there, believing it even when it seems impossible." Tucker pulled her close, kissing her hair. "I will always be there for you, and for our children and their children. This life we have built, this family, this love, it will last beyond us. It will be our legacy." "The best legacy anyone could ask for," Beatrice agreed. The years continued to pass, bringing both joys and sorrows as all lives do. They lost friends to illness and accidents, celebrated births and marriages, weathered economic difficulties and harsh winters. But through it all, Tucker and Beatrice remained solid, their love the foundation on which everything else was built. Their children grew and thrived. Thomas proved to be a natural rancher like his father, capable and hardworking, taking on more responsibility as he got older. Sarah was clever and kind, becoming a teacher when she was old enough. James was the adventurous one, always exploring, always pushing boundaries, but always coming home to the people who loved him. In 1890, when Tucker was 42 and Beatrice 40, they welcomed their fourth and final child, a daughter they named Grace. She was a surprise, coming so many years after James, but she was loved no less fiercely for being unexpected. "Our caboose baby," Beatrice called her, cradling the infant while her older children crowded around to see their new sister. Tucker looked at his family, at the life he and Beatrice had built from that impossible moment in the snow 11 years ago, and felt overwhelming gratitude. He had been lost before Beatrice came to him, existing but not really living. She had given him purpose, had given him love, had given him this beautiful family and this rich, full life. That evening, after the children were asleep and Grace was tucked into her cradle, Tucker and Beatrice sat outside on the porch he had built the previous summer. It was a warm May night, the stars brilliant overhead, and Tucker held his wife's hand as they looked out over the land they had worked so hard to build something on. "Thank you," Tucker said quietly. "For what? For coming to me. For keeping your promise to Sarah. For staying. For loving me. For all of this." He gestured at the house, the barn, the land stretching away into the darkness. "For giving me a life worth living." Beatrice squeezed his hand. "I should be thanking you. You saved my life that day in the snow, but more than that, you gave me a home, a family, a purpose. You loved me when I was a stranger, trusted me when you had no reason to. You are the best man I have ever known, Tucker Xander. I am so grateful Sarah sent me to you." "I am grateful too," Tucker said, "but Sarah did not make us fall in love. She brought you to me, but what happened after that was all us. We chose each other. We built this, and it is the best thing I have ever done." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the night sounds, the distant lowing of cattle, the rustle of wind through the grass. Finally, Beatrice spoke again. "Do you remember what you said to me that first night after I told you I was coming to you?" "I said I believed you," Tucker replied. "You did, without hesitation, even though it made no sense. Why?" Tucker thought about it, trying to remember what he had felt in that moment. "Because it was true. I could hear it in your voice, see it in your eyes, even though you were half frozen. You were coming to me, and somehow, even though we had never met, even though the whole thing was impossible, I knew it was meant to be. I knew you were meant to find me, and I was meant to find you." "Fate," Beatrice said softly. "Maybe, or faith. Or just two lonely people recognizing something in each other that they needed." Tucker stood, pulling Beatrice up with him. "Does it matter? We found each other. We loved each other. We built something lasting. That is what matters." "You are right," Beatrice said, standing on her toes to kiss him. "That is all that matters." They went inside together, checking on their children one last time before retiring to their own room. Grace was sleeping peacefully in her cradle, and Tucker paused to look down at her, marveling at how tiny and perfect she was. "Another blessing," he murmured. "Another miracle," Beatrice agreed. That night, lying in bed with his wife in his arms and his children sleeping safely down the hall, Tucker thought about the winding path that had brought him to this moment. The war that had scarred him, the years of wandering, the loneliness that had driven him to place a matrimonial advertisement. Sarah's letters and her death, Beatrice's promise and her impossible journey, the snowbank and those words that had changed everything. It had not been an easy path, but it had been worth every struggle, every moment of pain and doubt, because it had led him here to this life, to this love, to this family, and he would not change a single moment of it. The years continued their steady march. Tucker and Beatrice grew older, their children grew up, and eventually there were grandchildren, a new generation to carry on the legacy they had built. Thomas married a local girl and took over more of the ranch operations. Sarah married a school teacher from Helena and moved there but visited often. James became a deputy sheriff, protecting the community he had grown up in. And Grace, their surprise baby, grew into a spirited young woman who could ride and rope as well as any man. Through it all, Tucker and Beatrice remained each other's constant, their love deepening with age rather than fading. They grew gray together, their faces lined with years of laughter and tears, their hands still seeking each other out across any distance. On a cold December evening in 1899, exactly 20 years after Tucker had found Beatrice in that snowbank, they sat together by the fire in the cabin that had been expanded and improved, but was still fundamentally the same structure Tucker had built with his own hands so many years before. 20 years, Beatrice said, her head resting on Tucker's shoulder. It does not seem possible that so much time has passed. The best 20 years of my life, Tucker replied. Every single day with you has been a gift, even the hard days. The times when the cattle died or the crops failed or money was tight. Especially those days, Tucker said. Because we faced them together and we came through stronger on the other side. That is what marriage is, what love is. Not just being there for the good times, but fighting through the bad times side by side. Beatrice lifted her head to look at him, her brown eyes still as sharp and beautiful as they had been when he had first seen them struggling to open in that snowbank. I love you, Tucker Xander. I loved you when I first read your letters to Sarah. I loved you when I promised her I would come to you. I loved you when you pulled me from the snow. And I love you now, after 20 years and 4 children and more joy than I ever thought possible. I will love you until my last breath and beyond. Tucker kissed her, tasting salt from tears he had not realized were falling. I love you too. You came to me through the snow and you saved my life in every way that matters. I was just existing before you. Now I am living. And I will love you forever in this life and whatever comes after. They sat together as the fire burned low and the snow began to fall outside, just as it had fallen that night 20 years ago. But this time, they were warm and safe and surrounded by the love they had built together. This time, they were not alone. Outside, the snow covered the land in a blanket of white, transforming the Montana territory into a winter wonderland. The tree Tucker had planted for Thomas stood tall and strong, its branches bare but ready to burst into life come spring. The barn housed cattle and horses, the fruits of years of hard work. And in the house, their children and grandchildren were gathering for Christmas, filling the space with noise and laughter and love. Tucker looked at Beatrice, at the life they had built together, and felt complete. She had come to him through the snow and the cold, driven by a promise to a dying sister and faith in a future she could not yet see. He had found her when she needed him most, and in saving her, he had saved himself. It was not the story they had planned. It was not the life either of them had imagined when they were young. But it was theirs, every moment of it, every triumph and struggle and joy and sorrow. They had built it together from nothing but hope and determination, and love that grew stronger with every passing year. And as the snow fell softly outside and their family gathered around them, Tucker and Beatrice knew that this was exactly where they were supposed to be. Together, always together, for as long as life would allow and beyond. The evening stretched on, filled with family and laughter, and the kind of perfect contentment that comes from a life well lived. And when they finally climbed into bed that night, older and grayer but no less in love than they had been on their wedding night, Tucker pulled Beatrice close and whispered in her ear, "Thank you for coming to me. Thank you for believing me," Beatrice whispered back. And outside, the snow continued to fall, covering the land in beauty and promise, just as it had done 20 years before when their story began. But this time there was no danger, no fear, no uncertainty. This time there was only love and family, and the absolute certainty that they had found exactly what they had been searching for in each other. Their story became legend in Gold Hill, passed down through generations. The cowboy who found a woman in a snowbank, who believed her when she said she was coming to him, who loved her with everything he had for the rest of his life. The woman who kept a promise to her dying sister, who traveled 800 miles to find a man she had never met, who built a life and a family from nothing but faith and courage. And years later, when both Tucker and Beatrice had passed from this world, their grandchildren and great-grandchildren would gather around fires on cold winter nights and tell the story of how their family began. They would talk about the love that had endured every hardship, the faith that had carried two strangers through impossible circumstances, the legacy of devotion and partnership that had shaped generations. But that night, in December of 1899, Tucker and Beatrice were still young enough to hold each other through the long winter darkness, to dream about the future, to marvel at how far they had come from that desperate moment in the snow. They were still building their story, still writing their legacy, still loving each other with the fierce, tender passion that had defined their marriage from the very beginning. And when morning came, bringing with it the laughter of grandchildren and the warmth of family gathered together, they would wake side by side as they had done for 20 years, ready to face whatever the new day might bring. Together, as they had always been, as they would always be. The snow sparkled in the morning sun, and Tucker stood at the window watching it while Beatrice prepared breakfast. Their daughter Grace came running in, her cheeks pink with cold, followed by 3 of their grandchildren. The house erupted in joyful chaos, and Tucker turned from the window with a smile. This was life. This was love. This was everything he had ever wanted and more than he had ever dreamed possible. And it had all begun with a woman trapped in a snowbank, speaking impossible words that he had chosen to believe. "I was coming to you." And she had been. She had been coming to him through distance and grief, through snow and cold, through fear and doubt. She had been coming to him because she had made a promise, because she needed a new beginning, because somewhere in her heart she believed they might find something worth having together. And they had found it. They had found everything. Tucker watched his wife move around the kitchen, directing their daughter and laughing with their grandchildren, and his heart was so full it felt like it might burst. This woman, this incredible, brave, beautiful woman, had given him a life beyond anything he could have imagined. She had taken his loneliness and transformed it into belonging. She had taken his broken places and helped him heal. She had loved him when he thought he was unlovable, believed in him when he doubted himself, stood by him through every storm, and he had done the same for her. He had given her a home when she was lost, love when she was grieving, purpose when she felt adrift. Together they had created something lasting, something beautiful, something that would endure long after they were gone. This was their legacy. Not just the land or the cattle or the house, but this love, this family, this story that would be told for generations. The cowboy and the woman in the snow, who found each other when they both needed finding, who chose each other when they could have walked away, who loved each other with everything they had until the very end. And as Tucker joined his family at the breakfast table, taking his place beside Beatrice and reaching for her hand as he always did, he sent up a silent prayer of gratitude for the blizzard that had brought them together, for Sarah, who had sent her sister to him, for his own courage in believing the impossible, for every moment, good and bad, that had led him to this life. "I was coming to you." 4 words that had changed everything. 4 words that had built a life, a family, a love story for the ages. 4 words that Tucker would treasure until his dying day, because they represented the moment when everything changed, when his real life began. He had found her in the snow. He had believed her impossible claim. He had loved her with everything he had. And she had loved him back just as fiercely, just as completely. That was their story. That was their truth. That was their love, and it was perfect.